The power of forgiveness, forgiving others, being forgiven, but most importantly, forgiving yourself. This is what we're going to be talking about today with my special guest. You do not want to miss this in-depth conversation about forgiveness right after this. What is mindset? Our mindset is based on what we believe, and anything we believe in, we put into motion. I have spent my life putting the mindset of perseverance into motion, and now I am here today to share my journey along with others whose mindsets have changed the course of their lives. Hi, I'm mindset coach Lorraine Lindsey, and I believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. So are you ready? Welcome back to another episode of The Mindsetters, where we believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. Before I introduce my new guest, I'm so excited about this topic because I think it's incredibly meaningful to a lot of people out there, and we all can relate to forgiveness. But before we get into the show and introduce the guest, do not forget to hit the subscribe button. If you like the content, please give us a thumbs up. Let us know that you're out there. Also, send us your comments. And if you have topic ideas, we love to hear from the guests out there. And again, thank you so much for your continued support. So today we are going to be talking about forgiveness. And I am really excited to have this conversation because I do feel like it's an important one. I'd like to introduce, a special guest today. His name is Dom Waltower. And a little bit about our guest for today. Dominic is a violence prevention advocate and a dynamic motivational speaker who has presented nationally and internationally about his journey through domestic violence. He speaks about being a victim as a child, becoming abusive as an adult, and what was necessary for him to not only change his behavior, but to change his thinking about abuse. He speaks about a difficult topic with a candidness and a sensitivity that promotes thought, understanding, introspection from the audience. Dom, I am so grateful to have you here all the way from San Diego to talk about forgiveness. And you and I sat yesterday and we had a really great conversation. I mean, I think we talked for like 3 hours. First time meeting each other face to face. And there were so many nuggets and so many things that I kept thinking, what are we going to talk about? So I remember a while back, I actually did a show. It was intended to be a 3-part series on forgiveness. And the first show was probably the most watched show that I've had since doing this show in the studio. And it was Forgiving Our Fathers. And I got a lot of viewers and a lot of people saying, what about forgiving our mothers? What about forgiving ourselves? What about being forgiven by others? And I'm like, I'm going to get to it. And I never did. And it's so crazy that towards the end of our conversation, it kind of came up and it just had this feeling like this is the talk. This is what we need to talk about because your story is incredibly compelling, but it's very much a testimony to forgiveness in many different ways. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll just get right into it. I think we're just going to have a fluid conversation here.
Okay, and thank you, and I'm really grateful to be here as well. I'm actually honored to be here, and I truly feel that way on this show because what you're doing here is a phenomenal thing. So about myself, I'm a violence prevention advocate, and how I became that is the story, as you mentioned in my bio. My platform is from the perspective of someone that has been abusive. I grew up in a home with domestic violence, and that's where you can say it became a normal thing for me. And so that started happening in my adult relationships, and I became that person that I saw when I was a child. And so I went through that process. I had to go through a process of losing a lot of myself in order to heal and then change myself. So there's a lot more to the story. We can get into it, but in a nutshell, that's my platform. And I have to speak this message because, as you talked about forgiveness, I've had to forgive myself. I've had to forgive the environment and the people in the environment that I grew up in, because that's where this originated for me. I've had to forgive, my ex-wife. I've had to forgive my family members. So, and probably the most difficult part of the forgiveness, as we talked about yesterday, was me forgiving me. That was one of the biggest issues, and it still is something that I'm still working on because I'm not happy with who I used to be. And so that forgiveness part for who I used to be is a process that I'm still in.
I think it's interesting because with forgiveness, I think most people struggle with it, and self included, because with forgiveness, there's this attachment of letting things go. And sometimes when we feel like, if I forgive this and let this go, it almost makes you feel as though there's this rite of passage to the situation, if that makes sense. Like, if someone hurt me and I say I forgive them, in my mind sometimes it may say to me, well, that means it was okay what they did. But talk to the people that are listening and kind of dispel that a little bit. Because for me personally, forgiveness has been a very liberating thing for me.
Oh, yes.
But most of that power lies in my own self-forgiveness of oneself. Because in order for me to actually forgive other people, right, and not forgive myself, it was almost like a lie. It was a deception there. And then also, if I expect people to forgive me, then what am I trying to say? I don't know. Just I don't want to ramble, but I want you to kind of tap in.
If you are forgiving someone, it's not consent to what they did. It's not consent. Forgiveness is not consent. Forgiveness is freeing them from the debt that you feel like they owe you. So it's debt relief in a sense. I mean, think of whatever bill you might have, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They called you and just said, hey, you know what? We're good on that. That's forgiveness. And you let them go. And you think of the power of that. And you free yourself from holding the negative emotions, because there are attachments to what happened. Not only did that person, let's say, do whatever they did that, and then they're long gone. And then they're living their best life. They're doing whatever they're doing. And I'm still holding what happened. I'm still holding like, well, they did this to me, that did, and then that negative energy is going to affect me. It affects how I talk to myself. It affects how I talk to other people. So when someone tells me about relationships with, let's say, their cousin, oh, well, don't trust your cousins. Because you know what cousins do, because of my own stuff. So it is a release, but it is not it's not a consent to what they did. Some people think that forgiveness is being vulnerable, and that means that, you're going to be hurt again. And we talk about this in some of the classes that I teach, that when you forgive someone, you can forgive them and then still have boundaries. Like, I forgive you.
Or you can forgive and completely let go.
Absolutely.
Forgiveness doesn't mean that person has permission to stay inside your life. And I think that's a misconception as well. It's like, no, okay, I have identified with this as being something that was done wrong to me. And for some people, they're, very horrific things. There's levels to it, but it does not give a permission for people to stay in your life that have hurt you. It's like the forgiveness isn't for me, or excuse me, isn't for you. It's for me. So now I'm going to kind of circle around and ask you, what do we do when the forgiveness is for ourselves? When we feel a level of guilt or shame with something that we have done to others, and not really wanting to let go of forgiving ourselves because of the way we feel we've treated others, especially like in your story, you have overcome a lot, but part of that, your accountability is saying, I've hurt people, physically, emotionally, or whatever. I've really hurt people, and you've having, some self-loathing because of that. How do you get to a level where you can forgive yourself for things that you've done?
And that's that is the $1 million question, so to speak. But exactly what I just spoke about when I'm talking about someone else. And we had this conversation yesterday. I'm extremely compassionate, extremely forgiving, extremely empathetic towards other people. And so I have to turn around and look in the mirror and ask myself the question, well, why don't I deserve that? How come I don't deserve the same stuff that I give everyone else? And the thing about that, the amount of change that I've gone through in my life, when I actually step and look at that, I have to say to myself, I actually do deserve that. So, and I think that's a part of the self-love. There's a part of self-love to where you actually love yourself enough to forgive yourself. We had, a really good conversation yesterday about that, which made me look back at who I was with compassion. With compassion, and I hadn't done that before. I hadn't done that. I just said, well, I'm not that guy anymore. And I just left. I left that. But now going back, having a conversation with that person and actually treating that person like a human being, like I do other people when I'm speaking to them.
Right.
And so there has to come a place, where you love yourself enough to where you can go back and see the self-love. And you talk about this all the time on the show, the self-love, that love capacity covers my mess ups, it covers my sins,
It's
so
your
to speak.
grace.
Yeah, it covers
Right.
everything. But for a while, I did not think that should be covered. I was so disgusted with myself and what I did and who I was. I was like, no, that shouldn't be covered.
Right.
But even like I said, in that conversation yesterday, it was really eye opening because I actually do need to do that. And that's going to be that's work that I have to do, that I'm willing to do, that I'm going to do. But I think that, for anyone listening to this, you do deserve this. So I teach a class, anger management, domestic violence class. And one of the classes is on forgiveness. And when we come to the subject of forgiving yourself, that's always a struggle for a lot of people in the class.
And why do you think that is?
We don't want to look at that. Well, for me, I'll speak for me. Like I said, when I think back to what I did, I'm disgusted with that. There's an amount of shame that comes with that.
Right.
Shame and shame is paralyzing. It's a paralyzing agent. It's like snake venom. The venom it doesn't kill you. It's going to paralyze you.
Right.
And then the snake swallows you whole. That's what life does. And so the shame, once that kicks in, you can't move, and you won't move. So it's very difficult to look at and acknowledge some of the things that we've done. So in the I work with offenders. I work with domestic violence offenders. So in that class, we talk about accountability and we talk about healing. And we talk about the language. We talk about, okay, let's say if you have done something, if you physically assaulted your spouse, the language they're going to use, they're going to say, well, I didn't really, it wasn't that bad. I just kind of pushed him or her. They're going to dumb down the language because of the shame that's attached to that. And it's very hard to look at what you've done. When you've done something to someone, it's very hard to not just look at it, but then to articulate what you've done. To say, hey, I hit my spouse in the face.
Right.
That's no one wants this. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to say that. Has that ever happened? That has happened.
Right.
Very hard to say, but no one wants to say it. And so it's hard to look back at those things. It's very difficult. But you have to get to a place where you're okay with it. And I think the more healing that you do, the more self-love that you're practicing, it'll become easier for you to go back to that place. When you brought it up to me yesterday, you had me thinking about it yesterday. And I'm hell-bent on going back to sit with that guy.
Because, yesterday we talked about it and you were saying some really key things to me and me listening to you and hearing everything you're saying. And there was this disdain you had for the old you and saying, I don't like that person. I hate what this person has done and I want nothing to do with this. And because what I'm doing now, that person doesn't belong. Right. And I had said to you, well, that's not true. That person always belonged. They were just a person who was making bad choices. Now, the choices you were making, you may not have gotten the acceptance that you have now.
Right.
But who you are now was always in you. And I think sometimes when we make mistakes and we do things that hurt people, hurting people hurt people. And it's not an excuse, because we have to be accountable. And we've all been there. If we've lived long enough, we've all done something that has hurt somebody else. And to leveling degrees, but it's just, that's a part of you, but it's not all of you.
Right.
And where there is darkness, there is light as well. And I think that sometimes we, because of the shame and the guilt, we stay so much in that dark space that even sometimes we replicate and duplicate it because it becomes so familiar to us and we already beat ourselves up and say, well, we're already that bad person, so why stop? So let me ask you this question. What was the pivotal moment, or maybe there were several, for you to have this complete turnaround? Especially when you're still struggling. I don't know if struggling is the right word. When you're still looking to gain your own self-forgiveness. How do you turn around when you haven't fully forgiven yourself?
Well, I think getting to a place where you can actually look in the mirror, I think we have to do that work first. Just like our conversation yesterday. You showed me something that I had not seen. I'm doing this work all the time. I'm all over the place with this. And you shined a light into an area, and I was like, oh, what's that over there? Oh, there's something there. And I was not at all offended. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I was just like,
That's
oh,
good.
I was like, oh, I didn't see that.
Mm-hmm.
And so having the attitude of curiosity about what is it about me? I have that about myself because
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's blind spots. I know that I can't see everything. And so when you showed me that, I left that conversation grateful. So I think when we get to a place of accepting that it's okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay for that to be there. It's okay. And I accepted it. I've accepted it. It is okay. And so I wasn't afraid to go there. So I think that, so if people are looking to move forward, sometimes you have to look backwards.
Right.
You got to look backwards to see where you've come from or what's still there. Maybe there's some things that are attached to you that are,
Absolutely.
that are holding you back, so to deal with those, I think that's very important before trying to move forward, because yesterday was a lesson for me. I've moved forward in leaps and bounds in so many ways, but there's still some attachments,
Of course.
so now again, being open to someone, that was our first conversation that we've had.
Right.
And I'm open to, oh my gosh, you
But
saw
I think
something.
that's the key right there. I think it's okay. It's like seeing a thing and saying a thing has happened.
Mhm.
Okay. That's real. Whether you were the perpetrator or you
Mhm.
were the victim to a
Mhm.
circumstance, it's saying, okay, this has happened. And you make that real. Like you said, if you are the person who has been the perpetrator to the
Mhm.
situation,
Mhm.
being accountable and just saying it happened, this is what happened. And saying, but what's happening right now, and finding a way to detach the two. Because I think sometimes when we stay in it, whether
Mhm.
we're one side of the coin or the other,
Mhm.
we bring it, and I've talked about this many times on the show, but we bring it with us to life. We keep it alive. But it's really like saying, okay, this happened. Now what? Now what? Where am I at today? And so I guess my question then for you again is, what was it for you?
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of people who, we always talk about the victim and what happens to the victim, and
Right.
rightfully so,
Right.
right?
Right.
But we never really tap into in this particular conversation, the
Mhm.
abusive person,
Mhm.
and how they overcome. How can they grow and become better people? I would hate to think that every abuser is always going to be an abuser.
Right.
I don't believe that to be true.
Right.
But what was it for you
Mhm.
with forgiveness? Because you also mentioned I had to forgive the circumstances I grew up in. I
Right.
had to forgive my parents. There were different levels to it. So what was it for you that gave you this turnaround?
Well, I remember it was the loss.
Ooh, okay.
The loss, and I'll say this, for many abusers, the loss has to happen.
Mm,
It has to happen. They have to lose, because as long as I have everything the same, then what am I changing for?
right.
So when my ex-wife left and she took my boys, and I was sitting in my home, and my 3,500 square foot home built from the ground up with all the upgrades, and it was a beautiful home, and I was there by myself,
Mm,
and I didn't hear anything in that home. And I have sons, and so my kids are running around all the time. You're always hearing noise. I didn't hear anything, and the only thing I heard, and I remember this was like 2, 3 in the morning. I'm laying in the bed, and all I hear is the hum of the refrigerator.
wow.
And that moment was a moment that broke me, because I recognized that the reason I'm hearing that is because they're gone. And the reason that they're gone is because of me. And I know that. And so that moment for me was an aha moment. And I
Mm,
did some math at that time. And I said, okay, wait, Dominique had domestic violence in his childhood. Dominique had domestic violence in a previous relationship and in this marriage. So the common denominator is me.
mm,
That was my aha moment for me. At that moment, and then I just became deathly afraid of relationships, because I said, I don't want to ever be in one, because clearly I don't do this well.
right.
And then I said, wait, I need to start doing some work. So I left my job. I sold the homes. Like, I just said, okay, I'm gone. And I left the city. I was living in Los Angeles, and I took my retirement and moved to San Diego, and literally just started counseling, therapy. I went to church groups, secular groups, men's only groups, co-ed groups. I went everywhere because I was hungry to change.
Mm,
And it wasn't
that's
about,
powerful.
no, I it wasn't about my relationship though at that point. It wasn't, oh my gosh, I lost my relationship. It was because the reason this relationship is gone, and my wife had her own issues too. That's a side story. But the reason that this ended was because I took that because of me.
Right.
And so I had things that I needed to change. And then I said to myself, if I don't change this, all of my relationships are going to be like this. I will never have a happy relationship. I'll never be a happy person.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the moment for me where I started this journey. And people talk about accountability, when it comes to abusers. Accountability, step one. Step two is healing. You don't think that they need healing. Think about it, though.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be broken to treat another person that way.
Right.
And so I was extremely broken. And so I needed healing. I needed to go to jail when I went to jail. I needed that. Stop me dead in my tracks and make me realize, because otherwise I would not have done.
Right.
No, I'm good. Everything's okay. But that moment for me was my wake up call. And I heard the voice loud and clear, the voice of God telling me, I can't use you if you keep doing this. Like that literally is that's literally the voice I heard. And I'm like, use me. Like what? So there's a spiritual component of this for me too. But that to me was my moment. The loss. There has to be a loss in some type of way.
In some capacity.
In some type of way, there has to be something that cost you. If it doesn't cost you, as someone that's as in an abusive world, because abusers set up their world, their kingdom for comfort for them, and as long as they're comfortable, everything's going to be okay. I personally believe there should be a time apart where they're apart from the victim. There's just a Dominiquism. They should be apart so they can lose control.
You know what's interesting, because I grew up in a home that was brutal. I mean, there was a lot of domestic violence, and I've seen a lot of god awful things growing up. And I've talked about this openly. I think it's something that should always be shared, because there's a great deal of shame and guilt in that world, right? Where people hide behind it, especially because the outside world says, well, why doesn't the person just leave? Why don't they just go? And the psychology and what happens and the manipulation and the level of tumultuous relation, the back and forth. And then, and the thing that I learned, and even for myself, is that watching my mother at times, being abused, but then watching my mother be an abuser as well. And then growing up, and it was so learned that at times I never thought that I would become that girl.
Right.
Never thought it. Right. And I'm sure you probably felt the same way.
Got a t-shirt.
But putting myself in situations where, because I was so afraid of abuse, I became an antagonist in my relationship. It was almost like I pushed buttons just to see if the level of abuse this person would bestow upon me.
Right.
It was a weird, sick psychological thing that I would do. But yet it was a form of abuse. I was the abuser as well in that way, to just poke and prod and prod. And I don't know why I'm saying all this.
It's emotional abuse. I mean,
it was emotional abuse.
Yeah.
And I just, like you said, creating that environment, because it's so familiar and it's such a subconscious thing.
Right.
I never thought that I would ever end up being in an abusive relationship.
Right.
I never thought that I had forgiveness that things that I needed to forgive. I found myself, part of the reason why I found myself in abusive relationships is because I hadn't forgiven the things that happened in my childhood.
Right.
They were just things. I didn't even realize that they were things that needed to be forgiven. So I was carrying around anger. I was carrying around resentment. I was carrying around things that created personality types. It's what made me this independent, strong woman. This is what made me headstrong. This is what made me vocal. All things that I thought were suits of armor were really me protecting myself from the fact that I needed to forgive. I needed the healing, and I needed the accountability, the steps that you're talking about.
And those, as a child growing up in that environment, just like you, I watched my mom do the same thing. Victim in this relationship, abuser in this relationship, literally. And then my dad was abusive. My biological dad was abusive, but I was too young to remember that. So growing up, just like you said, I channeled all of my anger and frustration into a positive way. I played football. And I was a great football player. So, I mean, no one knew what was actually happening inside of me, because I had that cover up. I had something to cover up. And so this is something that is very, very prevalent and a lot of the kids that grow up in these type of homes,
Mm-hmm.
we don't get to it. And the kids, think about it, growing up, did you know that you needed to forgive? I mean,
No,
where, yeah, like,
that's what I mean.
yeah,
Like, you don't even know that it's a
exactly.
thing. And I think that's why I love to do these kind of talks, is
Mm-hmm.
because I think sometimes when we're at a place in our lives where we don't understand
Mm-hmm.
the people that are in our circle and proximity to us, the things that we're allowing for our lives, the things that we're actually doing
Yeah.
that we know are destructive and we're sabotaging, and we know it's not right because it doesn't feel right,
Right.
but we have no clue as to how to fix it, so to speak.
Right.
And
Acknowledging
even
it.
and acknowledging, but even like when we talk about forgiveness, and this is so funny, not funny, but this is what came to me as you're speaking. Like, I think about, like, when I talk about, like, even forgiving my mother, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
I love my mom,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have a very close relationship, but in me having to say that I need to forgive her actually makes me feel guilty, because then I start to think, well, if I tell my mom
Mm-hmm.
that I need to forgive her,
Mm-hmm.
then my mom's gonna feel bad.
Right.
And then I'm going to feel bad for making my mom feel bad.
Right.
And I don't want her to feel the guilt. But yet, it's something that needs to be addressed.
Right.
And so sometimes when we have people that we even need to forgive, especially when there's someone that close to you, you're almost afraid to have that conversation if they're available to have. Like, my mother is available for me to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be a hard conversation because it would mean that I'm blaming her for something.
But can you have the conversation? That's the question.
Right.
You know, that's we talk about this in the classes too, about some people, you want to have that conversation with someone, but a lot of people can't handle it. And so we talk about that in this sense. If you can have that conversation safely, have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and have your protocol ready. You know, make sure you're ready, because if the other, based on how they receive it, expect them to not receive it in a positive way. What are you going to do with
Yeah.
that? How are you going to handle that? How are you going to meet them with compassion and understand that they feel attacked at that moment? You know, so that conversation is really important to
And
have.
the attack, them feeling attacked, it kind of
Mhm.
goes back to what you said. It's guilt.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
If I say to you, if I go to a person that I'm seeking forgiveness from because they've hurt me,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to have that conversation because I feel like I need to, they're usually not going to receive it well. So I think that's a really good guidance there,
Mm-hmm.
for people out there who are looking for forgiveness, because human beings, we innately want validation.
Right.
There's something really healing when I can go to someone
Mm-hmm.
who has hurt me and
Mhm.
say, this is what you did and this is how I received it. This was my experience. You hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
And for them to say, forgive me, it's what you want everybody to say. You want them, it almost like helps to take the sting out of
Oh
it a
yeah.
little bit, you know?
My sons did that.
Really?
I've asked my sons are older, and so I've asked them when they were older. I asked them a question. I sat them down. I said, "Hey, what do you think about your mom's and I's, the relationship? Like, give me your thoughts." And they were sitting there and they were quiet. And then, the spokesperson of my sons, Dante, and he says, he just breaks the silence. He's like, "Y'all suck."
Wow.
And then the other one's chiming in. He's like, "Yeah, all y'all did was fight and argue." He's like, "We couldn't wait for y'all to get divorced."
Wow. That's
And
hard to hear.
oh, it was boom. It was headshot, body blow, body
Right.
blow. But I asked them that, and I allowed them to speak freely. Now, my love for them covers that. My love for them covers everything that they have to say about their experience. Like we talked about yesterday, they're the experts in being my sons. I don't know what it was like for them. I know what it was like for me, and being in that home. But when I asked them, they told me the truth. So I had to get to a place with them of being authentic with them when they expressed themselves. When they said to me, "Hey, Pop, we didn't like this. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? That hurt me when you said this to me or did this." And these words never come out of my mouth. I don't ever say these words. I did the best that I could. I will never say that to my kids.
I know. What's so crazy is that is the natural response from a lot of people, right? We want to, when a person is looking for forgiveness in something, because we actually feel bad, we almost want to explain ourselves. And what happens in that, and the intent, well, you don't understand what I was going through, or I did this because of this. And what ends up happening to the recipient is they feel like they're not being heard. They don't care about your excuses or your reasons why. But on the other end of that, we're only doing it because we feel bad, right? Or sometimes it's just blatant people just are not accountable.
We're talking about intent and impact. So there's two different things. So if I'm talking, so my kids say that to me, hey, you messed up as a dad, and then I go to my intent. Oh, well, my intent was this. I meant to do this, or I was doing it because of this, or blah 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 blah. But I'm not considering my impact. So if I pull up to your car, or if you're sitting at a light and then I run into the back of your car because I was texting and I jump out the car, it's like, hey, that wasn't my intent. We good? Doesn't matter. The damage is still happened.
Right.
Even though my intent was something else. I didn't intend to hurt you. I did not intend to. So a lot of us get caught up in our intent. And as parents, we get caught up in our intent. I never meant to hurt my kids.
I love that. The intention, just because the intention there doesn't mean there's not an impact.
There is an impact.
Right.
Like my impact, I had I had an intent to have a disciplined family, to have kids that were good and all this other stuff. But my impact, my children were afraid of me. They couldn't come to me. They couldn't talk to me. I would get mad at them when they talked to their mom, and their mom would come tell me. I'm like, why don't you guys come tell me? Tell me. Be a man. Like, they're like 5 years old, but they're like, come talk to me. I never considered my impact. When they were older and I was talking to them, they explained to me, they were like, Pop, you're like a god. Whatever you said,
right.
It was like, it held weight. If you told us we could fly to the moon, we were going to fly to the moon. Right. If you told us that we were stupid, we were,
Gosh, this is so good. I have to repeat that. I think for a lot of people out there, that's a great place to start. Is if I get your intentions are not
right.
This.
Right.
But if you could start with what I'm getting ready to do or what I did, what was the impact? If you ask that question, what was the impact? Forget my intentions for a second. What was the impact? Because the biggest thing is you cannot deny people their experience.
Right.
You may not agree with how they're perceiving what you're doing, but if you care and you have compassion for anybody out there that you see or they're hurting, again, you may not agree with it,
right.
To ask yourself, maybe my intentions was this, but the real question is, what was the impact? I think that's so powerful.
We get caught up in that, though. We get caught up in the intent. The intent saves me.
Because it makes it
saves me
because it's about you then, right?
It makes me feel better.
Right.
But when you're able to suspend intent, I'm going to suspend my intentions and I'm going to fully go into your world of impact. And when my sons told me what it was like being around in that home, it broke me.
Right.
And I needed to hear it. I needed to know that. Now, again, my love capacity for them covers that. So it covers me feeling bad about what I've done. Because I want them to be whole human beings. I don't want them walking around carrying that.
Say that again. Your love capacity.
My love capacity covers anything they say to me. It covers it. My love capacity covers them criticizing my parenting. I still love them, and I'm going to listen to them. I'm not going to just dismiss them. I'm not going to say I did the best that I could, because if I did the best that I could, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right.
So I'm going to listen to that. When I say love capacity, I mean sometimes our love capacity does not cover certain injuries or certain incidents, just like insurance. Like, right. Oh, we don't cover that. We don't cover that because no, you fell out of a window. We don't. No, my love capacity covers everything, anything that they can come and say to me, about their experience with me, because their experience is valid. For me to negate their experience means then where's the love in that?
Right, because you're making it more about you than about them.
But where's the love? Because if I say that I love you and I'm going to send you out into the world, because they're going to carry that. If they come to me and say, hey, Pop, this happened. And I said, no, it didn't. So now they're walking away feeling rejected. They're going to feel less trust. And now they're going to take that with them.
Right.
So to me, that's not the definition of love. And my love, the way I see it now, is that I can accept the negative things that I've done, and understanding that as parents, come on, who gets it right?
Right.
I mean, who gets it right? And if you can't acknowledge, there's work that needs to be done. Let me just put it that way.
It's so incredibly healing. And for parents out there, we've all had things happen where we feel like, God, I could have done that so much better. We as parents, we spend a lot of time being guilty, right? Making mistakes here and there. But what you said, I think, is so profound, because I think it's incredibly healing for our children. to
It
just
has to
know
be.
that they're going to share with me experiences that they've had. And it's tough sometimes because there are kids out there who, are seemingly entitled, or
Right,
they're,
right, right,
their world is falling apart and they
mm-hmm,
want to blame you and they're not accountable themselves.
right,
And so there's some gray with that, but I think overall, even when you're dealing with that with your children, I think you know your role in that
yeah, yeah,
and how they're showing up, right?
yeah,
But really just understanding that, validation,
yeah.
understanding the impact, letting them have a voice to share in a safe space.
And if they don't get it at that moment, and one thing that my sons taught me as well is that as their father, I'm not the teacher of every lesson. So the fact that you're not accountable at this point, and I'm trying to get you to be accountable, and I'm telling you all the stuff that I know to tell you, and you still not receive it, means I'm not the teacher of this lesson at this moment.
Mm,
I need to let go and let life teach this lesson.
right.
I need to step back and still love you until you get it. If
And
you
that's a
get
part
it.
of it too, knowing when to just step back.
The step back is a skill.
Yeah.
It is a skill, and my sons have taught. I'm telling you, they've taught me tremendous things. Stepping back is one thing. It's like I'm like, hey, you should do this, blah blah blah. I'm like, no, Pop, we want. Oh, okay, cool, no worries. Hey, still love you.
Right.
My pride's not in the way. Anything. My love capacity covers that, but it gives them a chance to move on because I ended up being an abusive man because I grew up in an environment where abuse was normalized.
Mm.
What I'm doing now is making sure that my kids don't experience that. They saw that, but they've seen something completely different. My impact was so powerful then. It's even more powerful now.
Now, absolutely.
It's even more for them to see it.
It includes your transformation
They
as well.
saw it. They watched it.
Yeah.
They know my responses. They don't see me respond. But we just went to so my ex-wife, myself, and my sons went out to take. It was my son's birthday, so we all went out, sat down, and had dinner. We're laughing and joking, and it's just like we're this regular family again. We're divorced. We're like we have boundaries and all that. I want them to see that.
Right.
I want them to see that. I'm not trying to get with her. She's not trying to get with me. There's no games, no animosity. I want them to see that.
But now the impact with the intention is so much different.
Oh, completely,
right?
Completely. And they see that. Her forgiving me, they see that. Me forgiving her.
Right.
There was a lot of things that happened in our relationship where we both needed that, and we're able to look at each other and say, well, yeah, we were some really messed up kids.
And are they seeing you forgive yourself?
I don't know that they're seeing me forgive myself. Myself has been hidden because of all of the other work that I'm doing.
Right.
And you just did that yesterday. Give me a minute.
I gotta give you some time to process. Okay, fair enough.
Give me a minute. I just started doing that, but they are going to see me. The conversation we had yesterday about me going back and forgiving myself. I've done some of it. I think I'm like 60% maybe, but there's still more that I have not done, and I'm going to go back and do that.
And it takes time, and I think that part of forgiveness is forgiving yourself that you don't always have it right. I think that a good way to really challenge yourself with forgiveness is to first go to someone who you know you need to be forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
If you have something in your life where there's people who have hurt you and wronged you, write that down. Maybe it's going to be a letter you write. Maybe you'll have an opportunity to talk to them. But before you get to them, think about things that you've done wrong to someone else and say, before I can require forgiveness here, I have to ask for forgiveness as well first. And when you go to that person and you say, I know that I've hurt you and I'm here, I want to validate, and you want them to share with you, sit in whatever they have to say and let it soak in how it makes you feel. Because when you can see how uncomfortable you feel, how guilty you feel, the shame that you feel behind what you've done, and you just kind of take it, then you can prepare yourself for the conversation you're going to have with the person that you need to forgive.
Absolutely.
And it just becomes a very healing process.
Yeah. It is.
We have a few minutes.
Okay.
And I knew this was going to be something where we could have I wish you were like right here in Vegas where we could do more segments.
I'll be back.
But you got to come back.
Yeah.
But to kind of close it up, what would you say are the greatest lessons you learned as far as forgiveness is concerned? and or just speak freely. What would you say? Final thoughts on the topic in general about who you are and where you're at today with all of this.
I would say that, to anyone listening to this who needs forgiveness or has to forgive someone else, you deserve the freedom of it.
Mm,
You do deserve it. No matter who you are, what you've done, what you've gone through, what's happened to you, you deserve the freedom. And I'll say this, and I think you know this as well. You know what that freedom tastes like. You know what it's like. And then the freedom spreads. It
mm,
spreads. It doesn't just stay. It spreads to other people. It spreads to other relationships. And so I wish that if I could just inject that in people, I would do that. But I would wish that for everyone.
yeah.
The freedom of forgiveness. It is so, as you said, liberating.
Yeah.
And it's the only reason I'm here today is because of that. That is the only reason I'm here today, because I was able to work through that with my mom. When I look at my parents, my mom and my dad, I don't look at them as, oh my gosh, they messed up. I look at them with compassion and forgiveness.
Right.
Like, what happened to you?
Right.
How did you get there? Man, oh my gosh. Even with your mom about maybe or maybe not she can have this conversation. There's a reason that she
Hmm.
probably can, if she can't. And so looking at that with compassion and being forgiving of that and
Yeah.
understanding of that, like, so of whoever it is. So my final words to anyone is that, if you have not considered that, let's just put it on the table, at least for you to just, like a plate of food, eat it if you want to. It's going to
Right.
nourish you. It's going to be better for you.
It's interesting you said that. I think about my mom, and part of my forgiveness with her was I did a show the other day with standards versus expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And I really realized
Mm-hmm.
that I had an expectation of who I thought my mother should be for my life. And that was from a child's perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in order for me to really let go and just love her was to see her as the woman first.
Oh,
It's like before she knew me and she
yeah,
became my
exactly.
mother, she
Mm-hmm.
was this woman and this was her name.
Mm-hmm.
And through her course of her life up until the age of 21 when I was introduced into her life,
Mm-hmm.
she was all these other people. And if she were a woman that I sat down and had a cup of coffee with, a random stranger, and she told me her story, how would I feel about her?
Mm-hmm.
Because I realized that part of my issues with forgiving my mother was because I held her hostage to an expectation that I had as a child of what a mother should be,
That's powerful.
right?
Yeah.
And to say, no, this is a woman. And although there were things and abuse and stuff that happened in the home and poor choices that my mom made, she wasn't doing it because she didn't love me. She was doing it because she didn't know better as the woman.
Mm-hmm.
She was making bad choices as a lover.
Mm-hmm.
She was making bad choices and not realizing her intention was good, but not realizing the impact.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was able to kind of pull myself out of it and not make it so much about me,
Right.
it's relevant. It all
Right.
happened.
Yeah.
But the reality is, this was just a woman who had her own hurts, her own pain, who was making her own poor choices, and also some great choices.
Mm-hmm.
And to really just see the person
Mm-hmm.
and start there with my forgiveness. And that's been incredibly healing, because then in turn, I need my son to see me as the woman too.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So forgiveness is liberating. You're right. And it's incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's an old saying that says, when the forgiveness is like drinking the poison, waiting for the other person to die. And it really is for your own good.
One last story really quick. My oldest son, he was by my high school sweetheart, and she lived in Seattle. And so he lived with me the majority of his life. And so he had some issues with her. And looking at her, he had the expectations that he had. He
Mhm.
got that from me. That's what I implanted in him. And he started exercising those. That caused a mess in their relationship, because he was holding her hostage to that. And then one day we got together, and he was crying. He was asking me, about his mom, and he's in his 20s. He's like, I feel like I need to go see her. I was like, go see her. I said, but go see her this time differently.
Mm.
Don't see her the way that you've seen her before. Go see her without the expectations. Don't judge her. Just meet her where she is and love her where she is. Don't say anything about what she should have done, or just go meet her. And he took that and he went there and he did that. And so he did that, and then their relationship shot through the roof.
Wow.
He's been waiting for her his entire life to come back, for whatever reason. She didn't have the capacity, whatever it was, but he went and loved on her because he forgave her, and he loved on her, and their relationship shot through the roof. The sad part about this is that 9 months later, she ended up passing away.
Wow.
And so she died. This was 2016. She passed away. And the only silver lining in that story was that he got 9 months. Ironic, 9 months. He got 9 months.
Ironic is that
with his mom. That
yeah.
the best years of his life, he got that time with her because he was able to let go.
Wow.
As the kid.
That's a powerful story.
As the kid, and I would imagine, I can only imagine the turmoil that he would have. I mean, it's hard enough with the death of a parent, but if he had not had that part.
That time. That's powerful. What a way to close. Dom, I thank you so much. You are welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
I love having these deep, in-depth conversations. I know there's many layers to your story.
Yes.
So 100% I need you to come back. But I thank you. It's raw, it's vulnerable. And it's exactly why I have this platform here. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you guys so much for watching another episode of The Mindsetters. And again, if you've watched it to the end, please do not forget to hit subscribe. And until next time, ciao.